Our next topic in this unit on cells are the two main types of cells that you're going to find. And those two main divisions of cells are referred to as prokaryotic and eukaryotic, or prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now, what I have for you to complete your notes on is a little Venn diagram. So in here, we will put our similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Make sure that you're using this text box feature so that you can do that. And then we'll look at the differences. For the prokaryotes, there's a separate video. Please watch the video. And then for eukaryotes, again, there is a separate video. So please make sure that you watch those videos. Now, for the prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now, what you're looking at is you're looking at basically the different kingdoms of life. So this picture is representing the different kingdoms of life, and it's divided up into prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And if you look, this little line here is what is making the division. So these two kingdoms of life, bacteria and archaea or archaeobacteria, are the prokaryotic kingdoms. And then everything else is eukaryote. So that includes protista, which a lot of people don't know so much about protista, or think they don't know so much about protista, but that's like the amoebas, euglena. Then we have fungi, so we can see a mushroom there, plants, and animals. So all of these are eukaryotic cells. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about, this you'll put in the middle of your Venn diagram, are the similarities between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So if you look, we do see some lines that are drawn in between. So these are commonalities between them. And if we look, we can see everything has DNA. Everything has ribosomes, those little dots there, and we're going to see later on those are little protein factories. Those are where proteins are made. And everything has a cell membrane. So if we put these in the middle there, we're going to put that everything has genetic information, everything has DNA. Now, the big differences, we're not on differences, but I just can't help myself, is how much DNA, the shape of the DNA, and where the DNA is located. But everything has DNA. And we saw back in chapter 1 of the characteristics of life that it's a universal code. So DNA is DNA. It's made up of the same nucleotides, but the sequence of nucleotides, the number of nucleotides is going to be different. Everything has ribosomes. Now, these ribosomes, which appear to be simply little dots, well, they're not simply little dots at all, but everything has to have the capability to make proteins. And we've seen how proteins are so important. Even if you just look at the cell simply, they have a cell membrane, so we have to have proteins to comprise our cell membrane. So everything is surrounded by a cell membrane. So just think about it. If there wasn't this cell boundary, then it wouldn't be a cell at all. It'd just kind of be ooze. And then everything has cytoplasm, which would be the ooze. And in the cytoplasm, there are chemicals dissolved in it. So we will talk about what goes on in the cytoplasm when we get into the organelles of a eukaryotic cell. So now we're going to focus on the differences. Again, there's a link to a video with the prokaryotes, and then above the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes, you see this weird something another, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what does she put there? I don't know what that is. How can I look that up? How can I Google that? But this is a saying that I will say over and over and over and over and over again to try to help you remember which one's which, to help you distinguish between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So what I like to say is pro-no. Pro-no. And when we're talking about pro-no, we're talking about no mainly to a nucleus. They don't have a nucleus, don't have one. So if you're looking at a prokaryotic cell and you're expecting to see this little dark spot that's a nucleus, you're going to be disappointed because they don't have any. Eukaryotes is yes. U is yes. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. And then to remember where you are eukaryotic. So I know when you first looked at that, you're thinking, I don't know what that is. I'm skipping it. But no, there's just some little sayings that can help you distinguish one from the other and to remember where you fall. Are you prokaryotic? No, you're not. You have a nucleus. All right, so don't skip this video. Okay, we will start on that left side there with prokaryotes. So the prokaryotes themselves, if you look at the word, it means before nucleus. So this karyo refers to nucleus. So they don't have a nucleus. So in terms of time, these cells came first. Some of them have, they have a relationship with oxygen that you don't find with other organisms. And the relationship that they have with oxygen, some of them is that oxygen will kill them, called obligate anaerobes. You don't see that in eukaryotic cells. You don't see that in organisms like ourselves. Now, they are very small. You would use a microscope to see them, but the power of the microscope that you're going to need is going to be probably a little bit more than what we have to offer. They're all unicellular. Now, if you're looking at these pictures here and you're thinking, well, those are more than one cell. Well, they're not really more than one cell. They're just some cells that are linked together. And the way that they are arranged is sometimes in their name. So there are different shapes of bacteria. So if it's circular, you can see all these guys are circular. And if you look at their names, Coccus, Coccus, Coccus. So that's circular. And at the beginning, Staphylo, Strepto, Strepto, that kind of shows you how they're arranged. So Staphylo is a cluster. Now, there are other shapes. This one, it kind of looks like a link of sausages. This is Bacillus. They're typically referred to as rod-shaped, but I like to say sausages or Tic Tacs. Some of the main ones that we are kind of have a little relationship with, that would be the E. coli, or that would be the Salmonella. And both of these bad boys here, which look like they kind of look like Medusa, but those are flagella. Those are structures to help them move around. But we know that these bad boys here are pathogenic, so they can cause us to get sick. And a lot of that has to do with foods, improperly cooking foods, improper harvesting maybe of vegetables. And then we have those that are spiral or spirillum. And the spirillum, you can see here, looks a little bit like a corkscrew. Now, going back to some of the differences here in comparison to eukaryotic cells, the DNA inside of them is not in a nucleus. So when you look at all these, you're not going to see this little dark spot. There isn't one. But their DNA, what that they do have, they have a very small, limited amount of DNA, is in an area called the nucleoid. And basically that area isn't a designated area. Sometimes it might be closer to the cell membrane, but it's wherever the DNA may happen to be. That's the nucleoid. So it's not a nucleus, it's like a nucleus, but the big distinction is there isn't a membrane around it separating the DNA from the rest of the cell. So speaking of separating something from the rest of the cell, they don't have organelles, and we're going to spend a little time on organelles next. And organelles are like little tiny organs inside of the cell. They have their own particular shape and their own particular function. So they're associated with some purpose, with some function. You're not going to find that in prokaryotes, other than the ribosomes. Technically, ribosomes are organelles, but the ribosomes of prokaryotes are about a third of the size of the ones in eukaryotes. Many of them have cell walls. And in fact, back in the mid-70s, science went from having 5 kingdoms to 6 kingdoms, and one of the big differences is between the 5 and 6 is they took the one kingdom of bacteria, which is referred to as Monera, they're referred to as Monerans, and they split them. And they split them in part because of the chemical nature of their cell walls. So some bacteria had this carbohydrate called peptidoglycan in their cell wall and some didn't. And so we're like, okay, we're splitting it. So now we have 6 kingdoms. Okay, now to the eukaryotic cells. So eukaryote means true nucleus, and that's what we have. Our nucleus is referred to as a true nucleus. Typically, these cells are larger. They can be unicellular or multicellular. Now, if you look, these are all protists, and they are all single cell organisms. So everything that must be done to survive has to occur in this single cell. So this is a paramecium, this is a euglena, this is an amoeba, and this is some type of flagellate because it's got flagella. But all of them have to take care of all their business inside of this single cell. And then you can see all of these other multicellular organisms. The DNA is found in the nucleus. So if you look at all these, you're going to see dark spot, dark spot, dark spot, dark spot. And if we were to look at our cells, we would see the little nucleus inside of them. And what makes it a true nucleus is the presence of the nuclear envelope, which is just a membrane. And this membrane separates the contents of the nucleus, primarily DNA, from the rest of the cell. We also have these organelles. So if you look inside, you see this other organization that you did not see inside of the prokaryotic cells. So you might have heard of things like mitochondria, chloroplast. So those are other examples of organelles. And then when you're talking about the eukaryotes, you're talking about all of the other kingdoms other than the 2 kingdoms in bacteria. So we're talking about the protist or the protista. We're talking about fungi, plantae, and animalia.